Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
Positronic hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Starfleet Academy. It was called Cozine, or Cozine, I forget how they said it. Anyway, as the episode starts, it's been a month since the huge events of the Miziyaki, during which Bobby and one professor were killed. And Caleb is struggling to find a way to reach out to Terima, who is recovering from her injuries back on Beta Z. And the Academy is closing down for spring break, I guess, even though it's only 4 days, during which a holiday called All Worlds Day is set to occur. Simultaneously, Sam is heading off to a hologram clinic to clear up the glitches that she's been having since she had gotten shot during the events of the Miyazaki, and Genesis is off to see her Admiral father. Before she goes, Captain Ake gives her the good news that she's being recommended for the pre-command track. We also learn that Ake has arranged for a nice host family for Caleb to visit with, but he has no interest in leaving the Academy and being hosted with a family of strangers. And he talks the frustrated Chancellor into letting him stay behind at the Academy, which is going to be essentially locked down before he sees her off to Senegal, where she's headed for the holiday. Jaden is off with Kyle to apparently a beach location where there will be an honoring of the loss of Bavi, but he doesn't quite get a chance to join Kyle because he witnesses Darum being abducted by unknown assailants from the Academy and dragged through some type of portal, through which Jaden follows. He then finds himself on a Kionian moon, Kionia being the home planet of Darum's people, and he's all set to attack Darum's kidnappers, but it turns out that his kidnapping was all part of a Kionian tradition in which someone is abducted when they are about to be a groom at their wedding. And now that he's there, has been declared by Darum to be his Cozine, basically best man. As for the wedding, apparently, a la Spock and T'Pring, Darum and his childhood betrothed are due to be married presently, about which Darum is a little confused because the plan was to let him have a bit of a career in Starfleet before the actual marriage was entered into. But apparently plans have changed because his fiancée is a princess and her aging royal parents are stepping aside, meaning that she has to become queen, and apparently you can't do that unless you're married to your king. Despite being surprised, though, Darum declares his love for his fiancée and pledges to end his plans at Starfleet and become her royal husband. But Jaden senses that Darum is doing it out of a sense of duty and nothing else, and kind of confronts him about it, at which point Darum gets a little gruff with him and says, well, at least I didn't cut and run like you. At which point Jaden says, well, I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to Earth and continue on with my plans with Kyle. Back at the Academy, Caleb's indoor sunbathing solitude is rudely interrupted by Genesis. Apparently, she has snuck back in because her father, it turns out, was going to be at a boring symposium and unable to be with her. So the two of them decide to have some fun in the science lab, playing a game of toxic or non-toxic, which she easily wins until a warp slug breaks loose. While this is going on, Jet Reno, who has also stayed behind to sort of, I guess, be security alongside the cadet master, arrives to deal with her very badly stubbed toe, at which point Genesis and Caleb have to hide out and make sure they're not discovered. The two of them then bond over laughs and stories before Caleb reveals he actually hasn't talked to Terima since the Miyazaki incident, because he's still a little freaked out over her having seen some of his painful memories. Genesis, for her part, opens up about wanting to step out of the shadow of her father, who Caleb very humorously calls Dadmiral. And she talks Caleb into hacking into the bridge for her so that she can sit in the captain's chair. He's reluctant to go along with it, but he eventually does until she starts booting the system up and tries to engage the warp drive, which he immediately starts preventing her from doing. And she uses the distraction to use a bridge console to make herself a special key, which we'd find out was her whole reason for doing everything she was doing with Caleb, because she needs the key so that she can get into her academy application before the Command Review Committee sees it. Before we can find out why, Jet Reno discovers the pair on the bridge and lets them know that they're really in for it. Meanwhile, Darum's wedding takes place, and it turns out that Jaden did not in fact leave and that he did give a toast as he was supposed to at the ceremony. It turns out, though, that Darum's fiancée sort of reads between the lines of Jaden's speech and realizes that Darum only went through the ceremony because of a sense of obligation, not because he really wanted to. And so she tells him that he needs to abdicate and that the marriage will be annulled so that he doesn't commit himself to something that he really doesn't want to commit himself to at this point, and she will just rule the kingdom on her own. At which point it's time to get back to the academy, and Jaden reunites with a now sunburned Kyle, who is mercilessly mocked for his sunburn by Darum, prompting Jaden to call him, can you guess? An asshole. Caleb tries to take the blame for the bridge break-in, but Genesis won't allow him to do that. And she confesses that she wanted to delete the letters of recommendation that she had received when she applied to the academy because she had altered the originals, in which everyone had said she was driven out of fear. She then attempts to resign from the academy, but Chancellor Ake rejects this attempt, though she does say that she's going to pull back Genesis's application to the pre-command track. The Chancellor then gives the two a whole bunch of community service hours that they have to complete for their transgression. And as they start performing this community service, Genesis basically tells Caleb, look, you got to get over yourself and reach out to Terima. So he makes a message and sends it to her finally. And in the message, he admits that maybe he actually wanted to reveal that part of himself that he'd been trying to pretend didn't exist, that she saw when she accidentally peeked into his memories. After that, we see the cadets gathering together to watch a meteor shower. And that's where the episode ended. So I thought this episode was the best one since the 2-episode premiere. And a lot of that is due to the A-plot. And by the A-plot, I mean the plot with Caleb and Genesis. And a lot of that is due to the fact that I really like the Genesis character and have from the beginning. I think she's a very interesting character. I think she's well written. I think the actress does a good job in the part. And of course, you know, she's gorgeous. So I really like the character. And I really liked the two of them together. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that I'm like a sucker for, you know, a pair of misfits or a pair of semi-damaged people who are thrown together in a situation during which they kind of go through their individual damage with each other. I really like a story like that. And I think the writers did a good job of crafting exactly that kind of story for these two characters in this episode. So I really enjoyed it, almost to the point where I kind of feel guilty because I really like Caleb with Terima, or at least I did very much like them together after the premiere and was kind of happy to see their relationship progress because I had liked it during the premiere. But if I'm honest, I really liked Caleb and Genesis in this episode. I liked their chemistry a lot. And I found myself thinking, gee, I almost hope that they get together, which made me feel guilty because I previously liked Caleb and Terima a whole lot. So yeah, I'm having conflicted feelings there, but it's because they have such great chemistry. And I really enjoyed watching the two of them go through the experiences that they went through in this episode. So we'll have to see what happens there. I want to say they're almost setting us up to have him switch teams, as it were, because why else would they do this episode? I don't know. Maybe they're not going to do anything with it, but maybe they will, and it'll certainly be interesting. But, you know, then that'll make the show kind of soap opera-ish, which I don't think I would like, but only time will tell. But I did like their chemistry in this episode, and I liked the sort of journey that Genesis goes through where she has to reconcile with what she did when she changed her recommendation letters. So I really enjoyed that. This isn't to say that that plot wasn't without flaws. In other words, if the letters got past the admissions people at Starfleet Academy and they didn't realize they'd been altered, why did she think the command track people would figure it out? I don't know. Also, she didn't expect to find Caleb there, so what was she going to do? You know what I'm saying? Or did she only seize upon the opportunity when she realized he was also there? I don't know. They didn't make that clear. But yeah, it's kind of a slight flaw in that plot that stuck out to me. Now that leaves us with the B plot, which is Darum's plot, you know, and his nuptials gone wrong, as it were, which I have to say I thought was fine. But, you know, first of all, it's a semi-ripoff of Amok Time, right? Character pledged to someone at birth or as a child, and then is called home, as it were, to go through the wedding. And then, hey, it doesn't actually happen. I mean, it happens, but then it's undone. So very similar to what happened in Amok Time. But anyway, I didn't really think very much of this plot. Like I said, it was fine, but it's another example of how this show will speed run the audience through a scenario without letting it breathe. And in so doing, giving it short shrift. And, I say that realizing that, again, they did the same thing in Amok Time and it was only one episode. And it was, it happened very quickly from beginning, middle to resolution in a single hour. But I don't feel that that was a rush job because it wasn't an emotional situation because we were dealing with Vulcans. So there were no emotions involved. Therefore, it didn't need to be something that had to have room to breathe. The way I think this scenario did need to have room to breathe in this situation with characters that do have emotions in order for it to not feel like the characters were just going through the motions of the experience, the emotional experience of what happened, which is that a character reneged on his promise to marry someone because it came up at a time he wasn't expecting it to come up at and was therefore inconvenient. And I don't think that was the best use of that scenario. I think a better use of it would have been if they had dedicated most of the hour to it. Because I think there were moments that they could have cut out of what I called the A plot of this episode. And, by making it a little longer, they would have given the scenes where these discussions are had about his sort of turmoil over having to leave Starfleet to fulfill his duty. And then, the discussions around the ultimate disappointment that he brings to bear for his fiancée could have been handled more slowly and with more sort of intensity. But what we get instead, like I said, is kind of a speed run through all the emotional aspects of that happenstance. Just like they did with the whole story of Jaden and his family in episode 4. They just, like I said, rushed through it, did a speed run through it, and in the end only sort of scratched the surface of the important, like, emotional or psycho-emotional heft of the choices made in that scenario. And so it's kind of a bummer. It kind of makes you feeling like I said, like this only the surface was scratched of the sort of moment of examination that that plot could have been of, the human condition, which has always been what made Star Trek as good as it was in the past, that it examined the human condition in big ways on a sort of macro level and, in more personal ways on the micro level. But previous shows did it in a way that the stories had time to sort of really look closely at the emotions and, psychological effects that were stirred up and gone through by the characters during these trying events, whatever it might have been from episode to episode. But here it's just given short shrift, like I said, and rushed through. And I think that's unfortunate and I don't enjoy it. And they've done it at least twice now across 7 episodes of this show. So that aspect of it was disappointing. But the other plot, the A plot, was so strong that I really did enjoy the episode. That said, I did miss once again the Doctor because I think he's a highlight of these episodes whenever he's in them. And my question is, where was the Doctor? He doesn't have a family, right? So where did he go? Did he just turn himself off? And that's why he wasn't there to keep his sick bay from being invaded by Genesis and Caleb? Or did he just take a solo vacation, which I guess he can do, right? He's got the ability to go wherever now, just like Sam. So why didn't they say where he was? That was kind of strange, I thought. Of course, something else that's very noticeable is that the whole wedding thing takes place on a moon of Darum's planet, not his actual planet, which conveniently meant that they didn't have to spend money doing all the special effects that would be associated with showing us his people in their natural state, which of course is they're kind of like fish people, and their world is like a water planet. So they got to skip doing that by saying, oh, this is just a moon. This is where we go to do our marriage things, our marriage ceremonies, which, massive cop out. And so that's a disappointment. And it's not so much a disappointment because I really wanted to see his homeworld, but it's a disappointment because, it couldn't be more obvious that they did it the way they did it to save money, and that's kind of cheesy. Sadly, I continue not to like the Jaden character. I think this kid can't act, and I find it very grating that his character is so awkward. And people have been goofing on the character for wearing the scant, which is basically that skirt, and that doesn't bother me except for the fact that his legs are so spindly. He looks terrible in it, and it's like, can we do something about that? I don't know what they would do, but wow, he just looks terrible in it. That's the thing about it that gets me. But, those are minor nitpicks. And like I said, I thought the A plot in this was really strong. And so, while maybe I shouldn't have because of all the drawbacks that I talked about in the episode, I did enjoy watching the episode because it just gave me a good feeling watching Caleb and Genesis, bond and basically trauma dump on each other and go through that experience together. So I enjoyed the episode.
Having enjoyed it, of course, I recognize that the continued use of less formal vernacular that they give these characters on this show, and by less formal, I mean how they make them talk like people living in the 21st century versus the 32nd century, or for that matter, the 23rd or 24th century that other Star Trek shows have taken place in. Because what that does is separate it from what Star Trek is and makes it more like a generic young adult show, which again, I'm a fan of and have been a fan of in the past, but I would be remiss if I didn't point out that when they do that, they are genericizing it and de-Star Trekking it, because the hallmarks of Star Trek are what they are, and some of those hallmarks are that the people speak like professionals in a futuristic society. They don't use words like stuff, which is a word that was used in this episode, and they didn't say dad, which they say on this show. They said father. And so, these are subtle little things, but when you take them out, it really just genericizes the dialogue and makes it such that it could be dialogue between two characters living in the 21st century just going to a regular college. And so that continues to annoy me. But I couldn't lie and say that I didn't like the substance of the A plot. I did. I just want to point out that in addition to that, I also noticed that it was very un-Star Trek-like. And the way the characters talk in that plot. And I think that's a drawback that this show should correct. Though, in what I read, the second season is already shot and it isn't looking good for a third season. So the opportunity to do that might not even exist anymore at this point. Anyway.
There are 3 more episodes left this season, and, I'm going to, of course, watch and review those as well. For now, I'm going to get out of here. I'll be back with another video soon. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.